Hello booktubing world, I'm Olivia and I'm here to give you my top 15 reads of 2015. Now, the new year is almost upon us, Christmas is almost upon us, so I decided it would be good to film some of the books that I've really read and enjoyed so I can recommend them to you and maybe you can read them in the next year if you haven't. If you've already read them, good on you and I hope you've loved them as much as I have. I have done quite a lot of reading this year. I've read over 100 books, way over 100 books, and I've read quite a few brand new favourites. I don't own all of them in physical copies, so you might see some images suddenly appearing on the screen when I talk about a particular book, which is of course the book itself. Hopefully it's not a random image in my video. That would be weird. So here I am to give you, in no particular order, some of the top 15 books I've read this year. This is one of the first books I read this year and it's The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Strout. I got this one from a friend of mine for my 16th birthday, which was all the way in January, and I read it almost immediately, which is funny because I have a huge to-be-read pile, but I decided I'd push it to the top. It's a worn down, really old, scruffy copy because he's loved it and read it so many times. And I really read it and I really enjoyed it. It's a middle grade book. And it's just fantasy and it's funny. There's footnotes, if you're one of those people like me who love footnotes in a book, there's footnotes in this book so that you can just, you know, learn more. It's just, everything about it is so funny and humorous, and the main character just gets into all sorts of trouble with demons and jinn, and it's just perfect. This is actually another book that I finished in January but I actually started in 2014, and that is A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. It's so huge, as you can see, which is why I read it cross in between the New Year's, and I actually haven't read the second one this year, which is making me very sad because I can't believe it's been about a year since I've read this book. I'm going to be reading the second one in 2016 for sure because this book was just amazing. I thought the points of views were handled incredibly well. The war and the idea of the fight for the throne was just perfectly done. I haven't watched the series yet. Maybe that's something I'll do in the future, maybe not, but I just really want to read the rest of this series. You guys, if you like fantasy, if you like immense world building, if you like immense suspense, then this is a book that you should be reading already. So these two books are books that I actually owned for quite a while, but I took a bit of time before I read them, and that is the first two books in the Anna and the French Kiss series by Stephanie Perkins. It's Anna and the French Kiss and Lola and the Boy Next Door. Now, these are young adult romances. I've always had this thing with the romance genre where I've quite enjoyed it, but I have to specifically be in the mood for it, otherwise I'm not going to like it. After reading these two books, I've been converted. I love the romance genre because it can just be done so well sometimes. Yes, there's a lot of cliches at some points, but sometimes it's just done perfectly. I think these books were done wonderfully. I had a bit of issues at the beginning of Lola and the Boy Next Door because I felt like I was being preached to about certain concepts and ideas, but lately that went away and the romance became wonderful and I enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed the first book. The first book had me up until 3 AM finishing reading it. If you don't believe me, you can ask my friend who I Snapchatted the whole time I was going through the emotional trauma of feels for this book. I have the last book, I haven't read it yet, but you know what? It's probably going to be a favourite of the coming year. Now, some more favourites of mine from this year has to be the Lunar Chronicles series by Marissa with Fairest in it too. I just couldn't really hold that many books in one hand. But Fairest still counts, okay? So I read the first three this year. We'd read them before my Fantasy Favourites Readathon, which I hosted with the two bloggers from Bookshelf Reflections called Inga and Carolina, and we did different activities and games and fun things with these books and some other books, and I just had to read these ones because these were the ones that I was personally hosting. So I speed read them and I absolutely adored them. I'd owned these two for about a year, but I hadn't actually got the first one because it wasn't in the shop when I bought these two. So I had these and I couldn't get into them until I got this one, which I did get for Christmas, and I just loved them so much. I really do. And I've got the final book, which means I need to be reading it soon, but I'm so scared. I'm so scared. Another book I read this year was the entire Spiderwick Chronicles collection by Holly Black and Tony DiTerlizzi. Now, I actually got this one I got it in a winter fair in 2014 and I read it this year. It's a middle grade book, it's meant for children, and there is a movie which I've already loved, but I really wish I'd read this book in my childhood because it's just so fantastic, you people. It's amazing. The story is so fun. It's got so many different fantasy, mythical creature elements into it that are just tied in perfectly. And Tony Did Lizzy, who does the drawings for this book, did the most wonderful, splendid job. This book is filled with beautiful artworks, and at the back of the collection there's the gallery where he shows all his sketches and ideas that he had, and there's just so much love for this book, and it's a beautiful hardcover copy, and I'm never gonna let it go. Never gonna let it go. Now, just before I filmed this video, I spent some time reading, and I just finished Open and Read by James P. Byrne III. And this is a book of poetry, and let me tell you, I don't usually read books of poetry, but I'm going to start trying to do some more of them because this was just so wonderful. I just thought it was so lovely. The idea of this book is that it's filled with motivational poetry and filled with life lessons, and anytime you feel a bit down in life, you're going for a struggle, you do exactly what the title tells you to do. You just pick up this book, open it and read it, and just read one poem or two or more, and hopefully that will motivate you and put you in a better mood. So I did have a couple of weeks before I had to review this one, so I did just that. When I was feeling low or down, I picked up this book and read one of its simple, straightforward, rhyming genius poems, and I felt so much better after doing so, because these poems are just amazing. They are simple, they're straightforward, you don't have to think too much to understand their concept because the title blatantly tells you what it's about, and yet they're little pockets of genius, and it was just such a lovely concept, so well acted out and written, and the final poem left goosebumps on my arms, you guys. Goosebumps on my arms. I just loved it so much. Thank you so much to James for sending me this one for review and for signing it. I'm going to be reviewing it in the next year on my YouTube channel, as well as I've already done on my blog. I'll leave a link to the one that I've reviewed on my blog. But I can't stop fangirling about this poetry book. I love it so much. So at some point this year I was reading a pretty big book. I can't remember which book it was, but I was having some trouble getting through it, so I thought I'll read a little thin book in between, and I decided to read We Were Liars by Emily Lockhart as I was reading that book. That was a terrible decision because I just totally shoved the other book to the side and had to finish this one, and I finished it very quickly. At first I was like, oh my gosh, I don't like this book, I can't stand it. And then I got to the last chapter because I already knew from reviews and everything that there was going to be a plot twist that was amazing. Everybody goes on and on about it, and that plot twist happens in the last chapter. Hold out to that last chapter, you guys, because this book is a spot of amazingness that you do not want to miss out on. Once that plot twist happened, I was entirely mind blown. It's completely unpredictable. I didn't see it coming in the slightest. And as soon as I finished it, I watched all the spoilery discussion videos where they pick up all the clues that could have led to the plot twist, and I just couldn't. I just couldn't with this book. It left me emotionally scarred for 3 days after I read it, and I even wrote a poem based on some of the quotes that I took out of this book. That's how amazing this book was. The first series that I read very quickly, it's an episode series, it's called the Snap series by Ketley Allison. Now there's 7 books in this series, and they're all novellas which you can read in about a day, in fact even an hour. You can finish the first one in an hour. And it's a mystery series, and at the beginning of the first book it tells you that a murder has happened, it tells you who has been murdered, and then it takes you all the way back a couple of weeks to the things where things started out. Now I know that seems a bit weird, but as the relationships build and intertwine, the suspense starts rising because you know who has died, but you don't know how they died, who has done it, and who is the one being framed. All of the people look really, really guilty. Fame is included, football is included, law is included, relationships, love, affairs. There's so much in that series. In my 2015 reading challenge, I had to include a book that made me cry, and to be honest, I don't really cry easily at books. So I was really worried about that topic, but you know, the Snap series just did it for me because it was so suspenseful that I cried. I know, that's a bit weird. It's not even a sad book. It was just so suspenseful that tears ended up coming forth from my eyes. I didn't plan on this. I'm sorry. Another book that I read this year was Variables of Love by M.K. Sheila. I read that for a blog tour, and I picked it up thinking it was a young adult romance kind of book, about culture, and it turned out to be a new adult romance. Now, if you know the genre new adult, you know it can lean towards the erotic side, and it's not my usual genre at all. I generally don't like those kind of books. But I think I might give new adult a bit more of a chance because there's a bit more to it than I thought. This one was about a girl who is Indian who falls in love with a Caucasian guy who's just normal. It's really hard for her because she's got her own kind of religion going on, her own culture, her own way of doing things. She's supposed to go through arranged marriage when she's older, and just them falling in love really changes her perspective on a lot of things, but it changes his too. It's not saying that arranged marriage is wrong and her culture is wrong, or that his culture is wrong. It's just them trying to work together to be together, and there's just so much happens in this book, and the romance is just done so well. I loved every single bit of it. I can't wait to buy a physical copy to have on my shelf, and I'm going to think twice before I judge the new adult genre in the future. The book that I read towards the end of the year, October, August, was We All Looked Up by Tommy Wallach. And I remember feeling down one day, so I just laid in bed and picked up this book to read, and it did not help me feel any better, you guys, because that book was a bit depressing. What's happened is an 6% chance it's going to hit and everything's going to end, or there's a 33% chance that it will miss. Wow, that's a big concept, and I think this book stayed very true to what it would be like if you were actually in that situation and what would happen in this world. As well as that, we got plenty of perspectives. My favourite character tore my heart to bits. I loved him so much. I love him so much. And it just was so emotional. It was so emotional. You had a lot of different kinds of characters. I felt like teenagers weren't honestly displayed. Like, they were all a bit into drugs and partying, and none of the teenagers were actually good. Which doesn't really make me happy because I think teenagers can be good people. I'm not saying that if you do drugs and drink you're bad, by the way. Nor am I saying that's good. Let's leave that there. What I'm trying to say is that the teenagers weren't portrayed in a very good light, which did bother me a bit, but I still managed to really enjoy this book because it had a lot of philosophy in it, and I think that's good for young adult readers sometimes, and if you're a character-driven reader, I think you're going to love the book just as much as I did. The one that I read this year was Made You Up by Francesca Zappia. I read this in July while I was on sailing camp. I really didn't like sailing. I don't like sailing. So while I was on that camp, in the evenings I would read to cheer myself up and to try and stem this seasickness feeling that was still left over, and this book made me so happy. It's about schizophrenia, and it does a really good job of portraying paranoid schizophrenia. And the best thing about this book was that it was not all about the mental illness, but it was more so the mental illness affected the plot, and not the plot was the mental illness. And I think that's important because when you have a mental illness, it is not your life, but it affects your life. And I think that book just showed the difference between that really well as having a beautiful cover, being very well written, and so interesting to read. This summer, I went to England and we also went to Wales, so that was a lot of driving to go from England to Wales, and I had a long time where I could just sit and read in the car, and I sat and read Violent Ends by various authors, which also include Sean Hutchison, among others. I can't remember all their names. There's 17 authors who came together to write this book, and boy did it chill me. Because this book is about this teenager who goes into school and shoots. Just shoots lots of students. Some end up dead, some end up injured, and this book goes from each perspective, 17 different perspectives. One of them is the gun, some of them are victims, some of them are victims before it happens, some of them are victims in their last moments, some of them are people who loved the victims, some of them are the boy who did this family, some of them are people that are in a neighbouring school and generally have nothing to do with it. It's just loads and loads and loads of different things that tell us about this boy and put it into perspective, because when school shootings happened, people always ask themselves, why? Why did that teenager do this? And this book isn't explaining why, but it's getting you to see things that could lead to that point in your life, and the reasons why this boy, aimed for some people and didn't aim for some. He saved some, and he didn't save some. And it's very interesting to see this, and it was so intriguing. it just made me think a lot, and while I was reading I was taking tons of notes because I was just so interested. So I think this is one that is worthwhile lots of people reading. I've got 3 more books here. I'm going to race through them because this is taking a long time. There's 10,000 Skies Above You by Claudia Gray. It's the sequel to 1,000 Pieces of You. I've reviewed both of them on my blog, so link below. And I fell in love with this series. Claudia Gray is an author who I've read since I was just starting secondary school. I read her Evernight series and I had to read this series. Thank you so much to the publisher for making e-copies for me to read, because they don't send paperbacks where I live. But it's about this girl who can travel dimensions and she gets into all sorts of trouble. She's in this huge love triangle and it's just amazing. The plot has me mind-twisting, mind-boggling all the time. I can't get enough of the series. The finale comes out next year and I am so there. I am so there. The Anatomical Shape of a Heart by Pinay is a book that everybody had been fangirling about in the blog sphere, and I thought I should give it a shot. So I signed up for the Sunday Street Team reading review of this one and I absolutely loved it. I did nothing until I finished the book. It had art in it, it had romance in it, it had mental illness in it, it just did everything right. And the female character was perfect, and I can't tell you anything about this book except pick it up already. Final book that I have to tell you, yes, it's another romance. After reading Anne and the French Kiss, I kind of read on a romance binge read, but this one is called Inconceivable by Tegan Wren. Every time you buy this book, 50% of the money that you've paid goes towards a charity which helps women who are dealing with infertility, because this book is focused on infertility, even though it's romance. What happened is Hattie falls in love with this Prince John, who is of the royal family. When she meets him, she doesn't know he's of the royal family. She's a journalist, he's royalty. You can see the clash there. But they fall in love and they want to be together and they want to get married, so they've got to sort out these clashes. And infertility is involved, because when you are going to be with a prince of a country, you need to give them a son, or else, basically, or else they can force a divorce on you, or they can force an end to the relationship according to law. It's actually in there. So infertility, romance, job clashes, controversial clashes, all of that is thrown into this book. It was wonderful from page 1. I loved Hattie's voice. I was addicted to the book. I put off doing homework just so I could finish this book. That's how wonderful it is. So those are all the books that I really enjoyed in 2015. I have read more genres than just romance and contemporary, you guys. I've read more fantasy, I've read some non-fiction, but none of it really compared to the ones that I just shared with you. I hope you have read some of these. If you have, please let me know down below which ones you liked. And if you haven't, please let me know which ones down below you want to read now that you've watched this. And I hope there's something on there for you. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It would mean the world to me. And please click that subscribe button if you want to see more. I post videos every week and I'll be back next week with another video just for you. Goodbye.